about that.
I thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. Tim Maguire, President of CUPE Local 79, representing the City of Toronto Inside Workers. We stand beside, in solidarity with CUPE Local 416 and the public servants that deliver services in the City of Toronto on this issue. I also stand here, quite ironically, making some remarks that are concurrent with, as the president of the largest CUPE local in the country, concurrent with remarks made by Bob Ray earlier. But I think they're important points. I won't agree with everything he had to say, but they're important points. First, I want to reiterate that a report has already been submitted to Public Works indicating, quote, effective in terms of cost performance, that the best value and lowest risk of the city is to continue with the current model. That was the September 2015 report. By contrast, the information that is being looked for now at a cost of $500,000 is engaging in a decision-based fact-finding mission rather than a reasoned report as the report you already have. And I also want to talk about another trend, because we're talking about what other jurisdictions are doing in terms of contracting out, not contracting out, managed competition, competitive bidding. Calgary, in March of 2015, City of Calgary found that initial savings and privatizations are difficult to sustain over the long term, and that a mixed service model is preferable to complete privatization. Last year, a report by the Columbia Institute for the Centre of Civic Governance called Back in House detailed why municipalities across Canada have been contracting services back in, because they've been not meeting service objections or financial savings that were originally sought. I leave this for the committee's consideration because it actually add to a debate that is currently in contradiction to what Mr. Ray thought should happen, was a practical discussion, a non-ideological discussion. This is an ideological discussion. This would add some more balanced approach to that, where cities across the country are looking to contract work back in. And I also think we shouldn't be looking at this solely in terms of contracting out or competitive bidding, managed contract in garbage. It's the City Council's decision already made that the city should be having a poverty reduction strategy. It has one on paper. The city has not moved forward its poverty reduction strategy, and specifically, it has not moved forward on its quality job assessment tool. This came out of the contracting out of cleaning when there were sub-minimum wage jobs being paid in cleaning at the City of Toronto when it took over administration of Union Station. So in response, they said there would be a job quality assessment tool where we look at what does a good job look like? What would the wages be? What are the benefits? Are they unionized? What are the hours of work? We've not moved forward with that. But yet the city is looking at going further, moving beyond the private-public balance that is currently in place for waste collection towards competitive bidding or managed contracts. The largest issue facing our city is inequality. And by making a decision, make sure that you know, when you decide to go down the road of competitive bidding, you're going down the road of deciding not to deal with inequality, but to add to it. Because the cities in North America that have actually done that, that's what they've done. They've ratcheted down wages, they've ratcheted down the terms and conditions of employment again and again and again. And in Indianapolis, you'll say that it would solve some poverty issues. What they did is they stole from public servants to have some pilot projects on poverty. If you want to look what's happened to economies that continue down the race to the bottom, look south of the border. Look south of the border and look at the conflict we have now, the level of inequality and what it's driven. It's driven people further right, and now you have Trump. Know that when you vote for managed competition and competitive bidding, you're adding to that here. And let's be clear, those arguments, those propositions are starting to happen here, and don't pretend that that won't affect politics and the social makeup here. It will be more and more difficult for us to do the project of dealing with inequality. So if you make a decision to move down this road, also don't think it's about garbage, and we will stand by Local 416, and we will stand by them, and they will stand by us. If the city makes an ideological decision to move forward with competitive bidding, because watch what service comes next. And we'll be standing right beside them to ensure those services are protected. And you should too.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Councillor Davis?
Thank you, Mr. Maguire. I think you were talking about this report, Quality Jobs, Living Wages, and Fair Wages in Toronto, a report that went to Council in 2013. So I think what you've pointed out is it recommended developing a job quality assessment tool that includes a living wage standard. So the living wage report and the job quality assessment tool that is supposed to help us to assess whether or not these are decent jobs in contracts still hasn't come for us.
Correct.
To consider. Now, I understand that at Council, they've asked for it through Government Management Committee. When we contracted out more cleaning jobs, that report will come in the spring. But your point is we should have that before we do any more.
My point is if the city actually wants to do something about poverty reduction and inequality in the city, they'll move forward with the job quality assessment tool and the broader poverty reduction strategy rather than moving towards a competitive bidding model which will drive wages and benefits down on jobs. That's its sole purpose. There are two decisions of council that I believe are being ignored. One is the poverty reduction strategy with the quality job assessment tool. The other is a decision that the city should reconsider contracting out where it's not met the city's objectives. Again and again and again, the city is moving down the road of contracting out further, like it did in the fleet situation, where it clearly didn't meet the city's objectives. So, has the city met its objectives west of Yonge? That's a question. And you're looking at that and deciding whether the objectives are met, whether that should be, instead of privately delivered, maybe publicly delivered.
Now, I'm going to ask questions of staff about the fair wage policy and whether it's been updated and how it applies to compare wage increases to the fair wage rates that must be met in contracts. But could you remind us, and I don't know if your collective agreement has the same wage rates in them, but 416 contract is 5.25% over 4 years.
It's the same wage increase.
Okay. All right, so that's interesting, 5.25 over 4 years. I've been trying to get information on contract cost increases and have been, my budget note request was denied, so I don't know how much we're going to get back on increases in costs and contracts, but I can find out about the fair wage. So this is the point you make, I believe. This is the poverty reduction strategy, and the section is about quality jobs and livable incomes. Is this the section of the poverty reduction strategy that says we want to try and create good jobs in the City of Toronto? Yeah, in fact, it says we've seen a decline in Toronto, increasingly declined in full-time, well-paid jobs, and they've been replaced by jobs with lower wages and few, if any, benefits. Would you agree, if we continue to contract out work, that we're in fact contributing to that problem?
I would agree wholeheartedly with that. Everybody's talking about precarious employment and what the result is for economy. People being able to buy less. There's less stability as consumers, less stability as people that want to be civically engaged. There's lots of reports on that, and we're contributing to it rather than trying to solve it.
Thank you very much.
And I just make one more point. I think it's also in response to your question, and it's in the remarks I was making earlier. I think in part the city's hiding behind the garbage decision and moving on a public policy question, a major public policy question of competitive bidding without having thought about that. We have been engaged at a number of levels in public policy discussions here at City Hall for the last number of years, and we find those discussions are important. Unions, community groups. people that want to be engaged civically, politicians, get to have comments on those.
Would you say we're talking out of both sides of our mouths? On one hand, talking about good policy and good jobs, and on the other hand, creating worse jobs.
I would
Lower
say
paid jobs.
that we have on the one side things on paper, but nothing happening with them, and on the other side, moving towards an ideological perspective under the guise of a garbage discussion.
Thank you.
Okay, so we have 2 minutes till lunchtime. We have a number of other people who have questions for this speaker. So I guess I asked the committee how you'd like to proceed. If you'd like to, we have, after Tim, we have actually another 5 speakers. And then we, of course, have questions for staff and speakers. So how would the committee like to return after lunch, or any thoughts from the committee? Because we have a minute till we are recessed officially. Do we want to finish with Tim, or, because there, just so you know, Councillor Carroll would like to ask questions, as would Councillor Perks, as would Councillor Karygiannis. Oh, and Councillor Fletcher. And okay, so that would be about half an hour, just so you're, I'm just trying to be clear, because there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they can each get 5 minutes, then we go into committee. And so we have 6, so that's
I'll be
that's
efficient
30
with my
minutes.
responses.
Finish with Tim. Just the lay of the land, just so everybody knows the lay of the land. It would be another half an hour with Tim. Okay, so we're gonna reconvene at 1:30, everyone, and we'll look forward to seeing everyone back then.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. Well, how about I'll ask a question to, we'll refresh our memory as to where we are. You evoked the poverty reduction strategy in your speech. So what I heard you saying, well, let's put it this way. Yesterday, we spent a long time talking about childcare. Well, that was the news of the day yesterday. And those are your workers in large part. Say we said, hey, the city's not going to run this daycare center anymore. We're not going to buy any more stuff or equipment. We're walking away from this. We're going to contract it out. You run it, Tim. Make a bid and run this community, this childcare center. What steps would you go through? Could you do it?
Like 416, I'm not going to bid against myself. So, but I think that's an excellent question. And to remind of the 3 points I made earlier: 1, on the evidence supports the current model. 2, the trend is looking, other municipalities looking at contracting in work and services, not this direction. And a public policy perspective, the poverty reduction strategy included not only the quality job assessment tool, which hasn't been done, but we've gone back on the commitment on the poverty reduction piece around improving childcare. And your point is also, I think, question makes a great point, and it's in line with what I suggested earlier. This isn't just about garbage. At the first Community Development and Recreation Committee of this administration, it was put on the floor the possibility of private childcare. So let's not think narrowly about this. Let's keep our heads cool and make sound public policy choices on poverty reduction, like childcare, like good jobs, and contracting out.
And you know, we talk about having to subsidize spaces and put people's children in them to keep the economy going. And there was a certain amount of Twitter chatter saying, why do we have to pay for that? But I think what I heard you say in your deputation, you're pretty confident, it sounds like, if they are public jobs and we keep to a certain bar, any one of these gentlemen with a spouse who has a job probably can afford a childcare space. You have no way of knowing. If we contract out, you don't know what those workers are going to earn. We could end up subsidizing them to be able to go to work.
I think you're going to pay
childcare and other services. Is that what you're saying?
We're going to pay no matter what. And it's a question of what you're going to pay for. I was at the budget consultation in Etobicoke the week before last, and a former member of Local 79 came up to me and said they had a pretty solid part-time job at the city in Unit B. It was part-time, but it was fairly consistent. They had to quit that job because of childcare costs. There aren't sufficient childcare spaces that are affordable in this city for people even making a decent wage at a part-time Unit B job. They had to quit that job. And if you continue to ratchet down wages in various jobs at the city through contracting out other means, you'll get the same thing.
So we can pay for their honest living, or we can pay for their social costs. That's what you're saying.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's it for members outside of the committee, so we'll go into inside of the committees. No, any questions from anybody inside the committee? I'll take a stab at a couple of questions. So I guess you understand, I guess, because I think there's some confusion around this report, that external providers would be subject to the fair wage policy. The fair wage policy, are you aware of that? Any external provider would be subject to the fair wage policy?
I'm aware of that, yeah.
The city's policies.
Yes.
You're aware.
And
And that's in the.
I believe the fair wage policy for cleaners is $14.25 an hour. I'm not sure what it is for garbage workers. Maybe the committee could be told that, what that might be, because I don't know that there's a category for garbage workers under the fair wage policy. So I think one has to be clear about being specific about what that means.
Well, they would be required to give employees salaries consistent with market conditions. And they would also, at a minimum, have to adhere to the city's fair wage policies, and quite frankly, all the city's policies. All the city's policies that have been created over the years. That's in the report. You're aware of that?
I assume that the contractor would have to comply with city policies, yes.
Okay. And I guess the last question I'll ask you, just in the report, I don't have it in front of me right now, but there's a nice little chart. I think it's page 11, but I could be wrong. And it shows where other cities all over North America have gone through this process. And if you look at the right-hand column, most of them have gone internal. Have you seen that chart? Are you aware of that chart?
I'm aware of, I haven't seen this chart.
Okay.
I'm aware of a number of studies that looked at competitive bidding models, and I'm aware of a lot of cities that have contracted out either through that or other means that are going in the other direction. And I think earlier one of the points that was made by the former premier, and it's something that we would stand with 416 in testing this question, whether it's on this or another competitive bidding situation if the city decided to go in that direction, around this issue of it being legal or not. Contracts negotiated, and then does the city have an obligation to live by that contract, and the expectation that a bargaining agent would go back in and undermine that collective agreement itself? And I think connected with that, we should be looking at what the labor relations climate would be like. I know this isn't specifically your question.
No.
But I think it's an important one. Labor relations in this city has been continually going downhill. Since the turn of the century, we've had 3 strikes, 2 challenging rounds of negotiations with takeaways, but we took those very seriously. But I just want to make this point. It's very important. It's very important to consider what it would do to that labor relations climate between now and 2019, and what it does to the next round of negotiation where we're talking about these very same things. Do we want to go into a round of negotiations where people are expecting the city's going to go down without a public policy discussion of the matter, competitive bidding?
Okay, so just to be clear and to be fair, it's actually page 20, the chart I referenced is page 27 of the 29-page report. And again, the right-hand column talks about successful proponents, and you will see almost all of them. I would say, I'm not going to make a percentage guess, but majority have gone internal. That's I just wanted to.
I'm aware that in competitive bidding situations, in a number of situations where work has been contracted out, it's been brought back in by the union, again agreeing to lesser conditions than were there before.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? I see none. Thank you very much, Tim. We're going to move on to our next speaker.